Hey guys, Enigmatic Mr. L here. Today I want to look at every main series Fire Emblem game and determine which unit is the best in each game. So, going over the rules, I am factoring their stats, of course, but I'm also factoring their availability, because I think a good unit who's around for the entire game is better than a great unit who's only around for like a little bit of the game, and also their utility. A lot of games go over, a lot of units cover, so without further ado, just get on with the list. Starting with Shadow Dragon and the Blade of Light, I think the best unit here is Marth. This game, the stat caps besides HP are 20, and stat boosters are more potent. They offer like +5 to a stat instead of +2. So not quite soloing the game with Marth, but him being like your biggest heavy hitter is a common way of playing FE1. Just give your stat boosters to Marth. You can warp him over, and he acts as both your boss killer and he can seize. Rapier is pretty good in this game, effective against cavalry and armored units, and you can buy them fairly easily. I think like starting in Chapter 8. Plus, he also just has general utility, as the enemies will always target Marth if they can. Like, even if an archer could attack Flyer, they'll go after Marth. Just his aggro utility is really useful. For Gaiden, I'm splitting up into 2 routes, even though technically you can kill a unit and then revive them on the other route. But for Alm's route, I went with Silk. She can heal, which is useful, keeping your mage's HP up, since in Gaiden, casting spells depletes the unit's HP. Beyond that, she has Invoke to summon a bunch of green units to help you out, or Dread Fighters. She also has Expel to deal with some monsters, and most importantly, she gains access to Warp, which in this game has infinite range. It's extremely useful in a variety of situations, even though most of the maps in Gaiden are route instead of like seize or kill boss. I find there's pretty much always a good use to make out of Warp. For Celica's route, it's a little trickier, but I decided to go with Paula. Could also see an argument for Catria. Some of Paula's stats are better, some of Catria's are better, but Paula is closer to promotion. Falcon Knights are really good in this game. Once they promote, they deal just max damage against monsters. They have just like a set like +10 or something. Triangle attack is really useful here. I think this is like peak Est performance. Like Fire Emblem Gaiden Est is the best Est, and that also helps Paula out. Just gain access to fly over the like desert maps and the swamp maps is really useful. I think Paula is extremely useful from the moment you get her, and continues to be useful throughout all of Celica's route. Mystery of the Emblem, I'm splitting it into the 2 books. Book 1, I don't see many people talk about. Really just Mystery of the Emblem in general is kind of one of the lesser discussed Fire Emblem games. But especially Book 1, people talk about Mystery of the Emblem, they usually just talk about Book 2. So just going off my own personal judgment, I decided to go with Ogma, who was really the MVP of my run. I Ironmanned it. He was one of the few units that both contributed a lot and survived to the end. You get him in Chapter 2, so extremely good availability. And while I do think he's not quite as good as units like Kane and Abel and Harden on outdoor maps, because Mystery of the Emblem has dismount penalty, I think Ogma is more consistently good. Solid growth rate, solid availability. He always uses sword instead of like switching to a different weapon when dismounting. So he's a solid unit from the moment you get him, continues to be strong throughout the entire campaign. Mystery of the Emblem Book 2, you have your really heavy hitters like Sirius and especially Paula for outdoor maps. Ogma you get in Chapter 4, and also like Navarre in Chapter 7. They're very good in indoor maps. But I went with a unit who is useful both indoors and outdoors, and also joined Chapter 7, so fairly early, is Fina, the first dancer in the series. So whether you're outdoor, want to dance for like a cavalry unit, or indoors, want to dance for an infantry unit, Fina's got you covered. She's very adaptable, useful in a wide variety of situations. Generally your dancers, they're about as good as your best unit. And if there was like a behemoth like monster of a unit who dominated the entire game, I'd probably give it to that unit. But because, like I said, unit performance varies a little bit from indoor to outdoor map, I'd find Fina is just used at peak usefulness throughout either type of terrain. For Genealogy of the Holy War, I'm splitting it into 2 generations. And for the first generation, it's Sigurd, no contest. He just has everything you want in a unit in Genealogy of the Holy War. He has a mount, which is very useful for like the largest maps in the series by a long shot. He's promoted, so instead of things like 8 moving, he has 9. And being promoted in this game, it doesn't hurt with EXP gain. He still gains EXP as a normal unit for his level. He only has 1 skill, Pursuit, but that's by far the best skill in the game. It's really all he needs. Allows him to double. He uses swords, the best melee weapon type in the game, lightweight, accurate, gets a silver sword in the prologue, and he continues that or switch to like the brave sword starting in chapter 3 chapter 3 can use that as well. He has Holy Blood, so his base stats are really good. His growth rates are good. I wouldn't say quite like soloing per se is the most efficient way to play Genealogy Holy War Generation 1 because Sigurd can't defeat every enemy on his own. Eventually he'll gain so much like defense and speed, enemies will ignore him, and they'll just head towards your castle, and what you have to do is like have Sigurd guard the castle and just attack them one by one on player phase, which gets kind of tedious. But I do think he does the Juggernaut a lot. Just give him like a few other units to contribute as a very efficient way of playing the first generation. The rings you get in Generation 1, you could apply them to like a variety of units, but just stacking them on Sigurd, just making him even more busted. That's a pretty handy way to do it because a lot of the drops just come from like enemies. Sigurd is best boss killer anyway. He can just get those drops. And then you're all set up to go into a Generation 2 and pass them down to his son Seliph. Which, speaking of, Gen 2, I think the best unit is Sigurd's son, Seliph. I think Seliph is better than Sigurd in some ways, but also worse. He definitely requires a lot more investment. He's not as strong out the gate as Sigurd is, because it takes him all before he doesn't get a mount until he promotes. But I do think once Seliph promotes, his performance outpaces his father, just because thanks to his mother Deirdre, he has both resistant and a solid magic stat. So he can use like magic swords like the flame sword instead of having to like switch to like a heavier inaccurate javelin. Generally, I find the best way to play, or the easiest way to play Gen 2 is just have Seliph inherit a bunch of rings from his father, a silver brave sword, the Paragon ring. And then after chapter 6, if you have just Sigurd or Seliph basically solo that chapter and then clear the arena, you can promote him at the very start of chapter 7. And he just is a fantastic unit throughout the entire game. Now, granted, you can give these resources like rings, Paragon, a lot of EXP to other units, but because Seliph, you have to have them go from castle to castle season anyway, I think he makes the best use of those resources. For Thracia 776, I went with Safi. Staff utility in this game is really good. Infinite range warp as always, also good for like silencing like magic users with like Berserk or something like that. Safi is your earliest potential warp user. If you grind up her staff rank and then you use one of your early master seals on her, you can get her like warp to make chapters like chapter 12, the only Fog of War map besides Gaiden chapters, a lot more manageable. Even just beyond like warp utility, which is still really good, other characters can do that. She's the only character with access to the Hammer'n staff, so that can be like 5 additional uses of warp, or 5 warp staffs fully repaired. So that's like 15 uses of warp altogether, or you could use it on some very good personal weapons like Leif's Lightbrand or Aspel's Graph Caliber or Ossian's like Vouge or Pucci. Really just useful from the moment you get her. Even just general healing is somewhat useful. Then especially once like she promotes and starts warping and you start using that Hammer'n staff of yours, I think she's easily the best unit in Thracia 776. For Binding Blade, I decided to go with Rutger, who joins fairly early in Chapter 4. Solid base stats, especially if you're playing on hard mode with his hard mode bonuses. In minigames, Myrmidons, they're known for their high skill and speed, but in a lot of Fire Emblem games, it's overkill. Like most of your other units will meet the doubling threshold, so the speed is just kind of overkill, and they're generally hitting the enemy anyway, so skill, likewise, is overkill. But in Binding Blade, where it's very difficult to meet those doubling thresholds and accuracy is shaky a lot of times, this is when like Myrmidon's good attributes really shine. You can pair him with like Clarine, even though the support is slow. If you stick with it, it grants a lot of crit, avoid, and I think like crit avoid. So we can reach like 80, 90, even like 100 crit, making him like your most effective boss killer. Even for that contribution alone, I think that makes him like a really solid unit. And just in general, send him out like him near with Clarine and with about 3 spaces of each other. They'll be like near unhittable to like generic enemies. He's useful from the moment you get him, continue to be useful throughout the entire game. I do think there are other units like Milady and Percival. They are very good, but one, there's availability. Like Rutger joins like 9 or 10 chapters before them, so he has a lot more time to contribute. And I do think Rutger, again, with those like availability time, is increased availability, has more time to build supports like for Clarine, and he has a general easier time keeping up with them. Like some of like Milady and Percival's support partners, they don't have nearly the same movement, so it's kind of hard to keep them together. Overall, Rutger, fantastic unit. For Blazing Blade, I decided to go with Marcus. Marcus is really good from the moment you get him, and even though his growths are just kind of they still hold up just to his base stats. He can be useful in the later chapters as well. Not as much of like an indomitable force, but still useful. I do think if you're playing on normal mode, the EXP is so generous that eventually your other units, say like your cavalry units like Sane and Kent and Lowen, will end up surpassing Marcus. I still think Marcus's early game contribution shouldn't be overlooked. And then even if you're playing on a hard mode, where like EXP is a lot tighter, eventually Marcus will get outclassed with some of the late joining units like, say, Pent or Harkin or Hawkeye, but they're not around for like the early chapters, and Marcus can still be useful in a late game thanks to his solid weapon ranks and being in a good class and good base stats. For Sacred Stones, it has to be Seth. I mean, what can anyone really say about Seth that hasn't been said already? Fantastic base stats, fantastic growths, perfect availability. The only chapter he's in is in 5X. It's kind of Ephraim's side of thing, but because Seth joins either Erica's route or Ephraim's route, he actually has the character with the most availability in the game. A-Wank in both swords and lances, even though Sacred Stones nerf paladins, making them unable to wield axes. Seth just doesn't care. Basically, just send him into like a whole swarm of enemies with nothing but javelins in inventory. He'll come out fine. He'll be on top of everything. Extremely useful from the moment you get him. I find that a good way of playing Sacred Stones is just feed boss kills to Seth, because the other enemies he doesn't get a lot of EXP from, you can just feed it up. Feed kills to like your weaker units, your scrubs, but then boss EXP because it grants about half a level no matter who kills. Seth makes the best use of that EXP. And he's also a good candidate for some stat boosters, even though his stats are really good. Like a speed weak can make him go from like doubling most things to doubling just about everything. Granted, you could give those stat boosters to someone else, but even with like without them and just minimal investment, just using them just for like boss kills as his main like source of EXP, level ups, that sort of thing, I think Seth is overall one of the best units in the entire series. For Path of Radiance, likewise, going with Jagans, I went with Titania. I think she's better than like Marcus and Blazing Blade, but not quite as good as Seth. Mainly just because Path of Radiance is a longer game compared to Sacred Stones. Basically, Chapter 17 is like a multi-part map, like 17-1, 2, 17-2, 17-3, 17-4. About at that point, it's not so much Titania starts falling off so much as your other units start catching up. And yeah, during like that part of the game, other units might end up like outpacing Titania, like Oscar if you invested heavily into him, Marcia, that sort of thing. But Titania is just such an indomitable force in the early game that if you were to take one of those other characters and just couldn't use them, you have other options available at that point in the game. You have like Jill instead of Marcia. You have Kyrian instead of Oscar. But in the early game, Titania is like your only unit that's really like just completely holding up against the enemy without any need of any like significant assistance. For Radiant Dawn, I decided to go with Har. He's useful from the moment he joins and just continues to be useful throughout the entire game. Wyverns are always good, but especially here, they have their weakness to bows removed, just making them even more powerful. The only two shaky stats Har really sees are his low res, which can be patched up with like a Pure Water, or even just he's weak to Thunder Magic, but the accuracy is kind of shaky, like 30-something to 40-something hit on him. You can't just bank on him dodging, because it's not like maps like packed with Thunder Mages. And his speed, he sometimes needs like a Speed Wing or bonus EXP or like transfer bonuses or something to meet like the doubling thresholds you would like. But That's fairly like nitpick weaknesses. You can just send him into a horde of enemies with nothing but hand axes and just watch him like go to town, completely wreck them. By the time you get to the tower, he's not as like indomitable, but he's still useful. And by that point, you have like the Laguz Royals helping you out. So he served his job well enough for chapters, for sections 2 and for part 3 and for like part 4. Special shout outs also go to Ike, who I can see once he gets the Ragnall might be better than Har, but especially during like part 3 and part 4, I think Har's mobility is a greater asset. And even then, like once you get into like the tower, that sort of thing, even though I think Ike is technically better because Har's had way more times to be more useful than Ike, I'd give it to him. Another good candidate I'd say is Jill, another Wyvern Rider, who even though she isn't as good as Har, because she joins with a bunch of scrubs in the Dawn Brigade, it's a difference of, yeah, Har's really good, but all of your units are good, even if he's better. Whereas Jill's like, she's good, most of your other units are trash. But I do think, especially in hard mode, the EXP gain hurts Jill a lot. She can't snowball as quickly. Maybe if it was just dodging easy and normal mode and hard mode didn't exist, I would give it to Jill just because she's a good unit among bad, whereas Har is a great unit among good. But especially factoring hard mode, I'm giving this to Har. For Shadow Dragon, I decided to go with Sheeta, and it's almost entirely due to the Wing Spear, which is just better rapier. Like, Sheeta gets to promote in this game, whereas Marth doesn't. You can just forge the Wing Spear to always give it more power to make up for Sheeta's low base strength. You can, like, I think you can buy new ones or repair them, but he's basically just your most effective boss killer, especially in this game, like weapon triangles is here as opposed to the original FE1. It makes a lot of, like, lance-wielding enemies. The rapier isn't as effective. Plus just general, like, flying utility, perfect availability, just not in the prologue, but any playthrough in hard 1 or above, just skip the prologue anyway. Fantastic unit. For new mystery of the emblem, I would say it's a toss-up between Chris and Paula, and I decided to go with Chris. Paula does have better base stats, and I do think specifically in the context of a 0% growth spray through, Paula will contribute more over the course of the game than Chris. But Chris is around for the prologue chapters, like all 8 of them, whereas Paula is not. And especially if you're playing on higher difficulties, those can be some of the most, like, hardest parts of the game because the resources and the units are limited. There's also just the fact that even if you're playing on, like, a lower difficulty, specifically prologue chapter 8 is really difficult, and Chris helps out a lot with there. So with growth, especially by the time you reach Paula, while they're both going to snowball into fantastic units, I think Chris is even more of a fantastic, just broken growth unit overall. For Fire Emblem Awakening, I have to go with Robin, continuing the trend of just Avatar characters being absurdly powerful. He has good growths. He has good availability. The main reason why he's on here is partially because he can change into Sorcerer or gain access to the broken Nosferatu spell. But granted, other units can do that as well. But Robin's the only character with, like, access to pretty much the entire class line. There are a few classes he can't get, special ones like Lord or Dancer or Tagwell or Manatee, but in general, you can just transform over to classes and have him get skills from them. You can do broken combinations like Vantage and Vengeance, striking first when he's at low HP and dealing increased damage, especially combine that with Nosferatu tanking, really powerful. Or you can just do other things like Arms Thrift, go to the Mercenary line, then use powerful weapons, and give you high enough luck stat that you just don't ever, like, deplete them. In general, the easiest way to play Awakening is just Crom and Robin solo, like Robin. Have Crom as, like, a stat backpack and just have Robin just go to town. Granted, anyone in Awakening can just be made to, like, snowball unit and just wreck everything, but Robin, I think, has the easiest time of doing that. For Fire Emblem Fates, I'm splitting it into the 3 routes. Birthright, it's a tough one between Corrin and Ryoma. Corrin does have more availability, but I decided to go with Ryoma. In other games, I would say the increase in availability matters a lot more, like, because your early game chapters, your options are depleted. You really value those early game contributions more than late. But early game Birthright is easy enough that even if you're just relying on non-Corrin units, they can generally get the job done. And once Ryoma joins at the, like, end of chapter 13, the easiest, most effective way of playing the game is just, like, stack a Corrin backpack on Ryoma and just watch him go to town. 1-2 range with his Regento, very high void, Astra and Vantage can help him fill up the guard game to survive if he does get unlucky. He does face a small but real chance of death, but ignoring Iron Man settings, if he dies, just reset. It's still, I think, the most effective way of just clearing Birthright is Ryoma with a Corrin backpack. And maybe you might use Corrin here and there for the final boss, Garen. You need Ryoma and Corrin to both attack him, because Ryoma can't just do the job alone. But other than that, Ryoma he wrecks house the moment he joins and continues to utterly wreck everything. To the point many players play Birthright, they don't have any sort of self-imposed challenge per se, but they do bench Ryoma just because he makes the game a bit too brain dead and easy. For Conquest, Ryoma isn't here, so we have to go with someone else. Many people would say Camilla, who joins pretty early, Chapter 10, is useful throughout the entire game. And she is good, but I decided to go with Azura. Corrin is also another strong contender here as well. Azura, her dance utility is very useful throughout the entire campaign. Can dance for Camilla or Corrin, have them act twice in one turn. That's useful. A big contribution here, which you could argue is just a single contribution, but to me it matters a lot, is the final map in Conquest in-game is the most bullcrap map in the entire series, in my opinion. And Azura's sing strategies and combined with rescue, she enables a one-turn clear of that. And other units do contribute to that one-turn clear, but everything other units could do, be it entrap or pass or rescue or your boss killer, you could substitute them out for someone else, but only Azura allows you to sing and refresh units. And yeah, that's just one map, but like I said, it is the most bullcrap map in the entire series. Combined with that, with Azura is still very useful in other regards from the moment she rejoins in Chapter 9 throughout the entire game, and that's why I gave her the top spot. For Fire Emblem Fates Revelation, it's a tricky one. You might think I'd go with Ryoma again, but I decided to go with Corrin for a few reasons. One, like I said, in Birthright, the gap between Ryoma and Corrin is very close. Here it's even closer because Ryoma joins about 2 chapters later as opposed to in Birthright. But also just the enemy quality is more intense here than Birthright. I'm sure it's possible to just kind of solo everything with Ryoma, but in general I find that you're going to kind of split up your army, have Ryoma defeat some enemies, Corrin defeat some enemies. And in that regard, even though Corrin, from the moment Ryoma joins, is slightly less powerful than Ryoma, being useful throughout the entire game, and just being we're in the first half of the game, she's contributing a lot, Ryoma's doing nothing. And as opposed to when Ryoma joins, he contributes slightly more, but Corrin is still a very high contributor. If I had to pick just one unit for Fire Emblem Fates to be the best unit, it probably would be Corrin. Next, we head back to Valentia with Fire Emblem Echoes, Shadows of Valentia. For Alms Route, the best unit, I decided to go with Cliff. Basically, your best unit in Alms Route is going to be whoever you make into a bow knight and give the killer bow to. So it could even be Leon, but I find one of the villagers does that well. Cliff, I just think, has so much versatility. He can make him into a mage, his semi-canon class, and he gains access to some really good spells. Granted, he joins, so he learns some of those spells a little bit late, so to the point where Tobin's arguably a better mage, and he doesn't get physic. But he takes a while to get snowballing, make use of his good speed growth, but after that, he can be formed really well as a mage. He can also make a good mercenary, go into Dread Fighter, immediately fix his low speed base, and combine that with his high speed growth. He can end up doubling some the fastest enemies, those eyeball enemies in the very near the end of the game that pretty much double everybody. Cliff can double those. But I think the quote unquote meta strat, I think, is to put him through Dread Fighter and then do Villager Loop and to go back to Archer so we can get that Killer's Bow, but with the base stats of a Dread Fighter. Cliff, in addition to his good speed growth, he also has good defense. So with that bow, he can end up enemy phasing as well, not just player phasing with Killer Bow, but good speed allows him to sometimes double on enemy phase, and good defense allows him to tank hits. Very versatile unit, very useful. For Celica's route, with the addition of the Killer Bow instead of Paula, I decided to go with Leon. Well, granted, Atlas can go into Bow Knight as well, but by the time Atlas joins, Leon's either Ed Sniper or very close to Sniper. Just having that, high movement and the ability to delete anything on player phase is extremely useful. As outside of the DLC Pitchfork and, like I said, Atlas, Leon's your only go-to option using that Killer Bow. So that's why I think he earns the spot as best unit on her route. Three Houses is a very interesting case, as I do think it's pretty clear most people would agree the best unit is whoever your main lord is in that route. Maybe if you're going like Silver Snow, maybe like Byleth. I have seen the argument for the game as a whole be Lysithea, who she's very useful in every single route she's in. And I do think Lysithea is great, but I do think her lack of enemy phase, even though she can warp in other units, that sort of thing, it gets up to attack from afar, the fact that she really can't take hits makes her just a little bit worse than like each of the three lords. So I could just split this into routes and say, okay, Dimitri's best in his route, Claude's the best in his route, Edelgard's best in her route. But I think that's a little more unpredictable. So instead, I decided who is the best of the best, like the best lord, and factor in their own route. And for my money, I'm going to go with Dimitri. You could call me out on this just being Dimitri bias. If you've seen my favorite Fire Emblem characters, Dimitri is one of my favorite. He's probably my favorite lord and just one of my favorite characters in general in the series. But as discussing his pros against like the others, Claude has probably of the three lords the best like base boon balance. He has a boon in both axes and bows. So we can gain easy access to Death Blow and to hit plus 20, as opposed to Edelgard's Bane and Bows and Dimitri's Bane and Axes. And he also has easy access to basically a fine adjacent class. But outside of that, Claude doesn't really have anything particular special or noteworthy about him. Edelgard, especially like her Amir in like part 2, can allow her to just be the ultimate player phase unit. And as long as that doesn't break and you get enough Agarthium to like repair it, you can just do a lot of things. But Dimitri, I think, is the ultimate enemy phase unit with his broken Battalion Wrath, Battalion Vantage combo. Looking at that, it is close. You might think to go to Edelgard and just turn one, clear everything on like player phase. But Dimitri has a significant edge when it comes to availability. His campaign is longer, 22 chapters, opposed to Edelgard's 18. That's 4 more chapters we have like a fantastic unit, as opposed to, think of it if you had to play through 3 houses without Dimitri or 3 houses without Edelgard. Both would be horrible. But I think 3 houses or without Dimitri on his route would be even more horrible because you have to go even longer. There's also just paralogs if you're going out of your way to recruit students and get paralogs. Dimitri and Tadu have their paralog. Edelgard has hers and Hubert's. But there's also certain characters you can only recruit, only gain access to the paralogs outside of Crimson Flower. So on Dimitri's route, you'll have access to him on Mercedes / Kaspar's paralog, Ferdinand / Lysithea's paralog, Rhea's paralog, Hilda / Ariel's paralog, Annette / Gilbert's paralog, and for Leonie / Linhart's paralog. And there's just the fact in the main story, you also don't have Edelgard in like chapter 11, which you do have Dimitri in chapter 11. So that edge and availability is why I give him the slight edge over Edelgard. Even though you could argue while you have both, Edelgard is better. Next for Fire Emblem Engage, which does have a lot of very good units, like Hortensia, the ultimate support unit, especially like Micaiah, if you equip her with Micaiah. And there's Kagetsu, just extremely useful out the get-go and good growth as well. Ivy, flying, high magic, very good unit. But none of them are really like broken or extremely powerful, like say any of the lords are in 3 houses. So I went with a utility support unit in Seidel, your dancer of the game. What other units can do can be replicated. You can give them different emblems, that sort of thing, different weapons, change their class. But Seidel, the ability to dance and refresh for every unit, makes him very versatile. Like I played Fire Emblem Engage about like 4 or 5 times, and I've switched up my team a lot. But Seidel's just refresh ability for dancing is something that cannot be replicated with other units. There is Byleth 4-way dance, but you can just dance and combine that as well. Besides that, like Byleth's like 4-way dance and Seidel's dance, you can't really replicate what Seidel does with any other unit. Plus, even just when on the rare occasions where Seidel doesn't have a chance to like make use of dance, it can't just chain guard if you're like baiting out enemies or that sort of thing. And while all units obviously gain a lot from inheriting Sigurd's Cantor, I think Seidel makes the best user of it. Well, everyone can use it. It's not like it's just limited to him, but Seidel gets a particularly lot out of use for that Cantor, just for being like a dancer, keep up with your other units. Also pretty good candidate, I'd say, for like boots. But even without those like favoritism, like the boots, that sort of thing, Seidel's just fantastic from the moment you get him. Fantastic all the way up to again. All right, that is my list for the best units in each Fire Emblem main series game. As always, thank you so much for watching. If you think I didn't include a unit you think should include it, feel free to voice your opinion in the comments. Why you think X I should have chosen X character instead and why. And this is Enigmatic Mr. L signing out.